That's me, Bonnie. I live in Western Australia. I work as a midwife here in one of the public hospitals. I live with my very tall, lovely husband, 2 inexhaustibly energetic kids, and an ongoing obsession with the music of Harry Styles. Now, I know that that's not much to go on, and we haven't known each other long, but I wanted to show you a memory of mine. So, this memory of mine, my brain has used as a feature piece of art on the wall of my mind for years. I'm about 10 here, and I'm looking at the ballet costumes for a dance concert coming up. I used to do dance when I was little, and I loved it. See these 2 ladies here? They don't know I'm in here. They've been organising the costumes for the concert and didn't see me sneak into the costume room to take a peek. I'm gazing at my favourite costume, and I start to realise that these 2 women are talking about me. I tune into their conversation and I hear this. The trouble with Bonnie is that she's just getting so big. That was the trouble with me. I was getting too big. Oh, and what an awful thing to be. Big. Working in a hospital as a midwife means that I work in an environment that's mostly women, and I don't know that I've been through a day without discussing a diet or weight loss or whether breastfeeding will help you lose weight or not. We've got a real issue with being big, don't we? As women, we're taught to shrink, to physically take up as little space as possible. And I've seen that in midwifery, in a space where I don't think I ever expected to see it. And I don't think it's just down to our physical size, but it's made me wonder, is there a connection between how much space we take up, how big we are, how bulky we've let ourselves be, and the current midwifery space that we work within? And we know that taking up space as a woman is more than just clothing size. It's our pain. How many needs do we have? How loud are we? How emotional are we? How many questions do we ask? And I think we can find out what I'm calling our FMI, Female Mass Index, with some reflective questions and calculations. So firstly, take how many times you feel like you need to start a question or a sentence with the word sorry, and divide that by how often you feel like a boundary has been crossed and yet you've responded with forced politeness rather than honesty or openness. So take that number and then multiply it by how often you say yes when your instinct is to say no. And then finally add to that the number of seconds it takes you to minimise your feelings when you're angry. How we feel about anger can be a key way to see how much respect and trust we carry for ourselves and how much space we feel comfortable to take up. I know so many of us working in this space have consistent anger that we live in, and so often we try to rid ourselves of this anger because we've been taught that anger is a big, unhelpful, uncomfortable, ugly emotion. And I see it every day. We're surrounded by choices, practices, policies, ignorance and patriarchy that makes us angry and uncomfortable. But the amount of anger we hold versus the space that we take up is wildly disproportionate. And it's interesting because our English word for anger derives from the Indo-Germanic root ang, meaning to constrict. And ang is the same root word for our English words angst, anxiety, angina, and in angina the blood supply to the heart is constricted, and when we feel anxious our breathing is often shallow, reflecting our physiological state of constriction. Ladies, we are living in too narrow a space. Soraya Chemaly is a writer and activist centering in on women's equality and female anger. This is a snippet in one of her public talks where she presents some perspectives on anger. Have a listen.
Anger is a human emotion, neither good nor bad. It is actually a signal emotion. It warns us of indignity, threat, insult, and harm. And yet, in culture after culture, anger is reserved as the moral property of boys and men. And so we teach children to disdain anger in girls and women, and we grow up to be adults that penalize it. So what if we didn't do that? What if we didn't sever anger from femininity? Because severing anger from femininity means we sever girls and women from the emotion that best protects us from injustice. What if instead we thought about developing emotional competence for boys and girls? The fact is, we still remarkably socialize children in very binary and oppositional ways. Boys are held to absurd, rigid norms of masculinity, told to sort of renounce the feminine emotionality of sadness or fear, and to embrace aggression and anger as markers of real manhood. On the other hand, girls learn to be deferential, and anger is incompatible with deference. In the same way that we learn to cross our legs and tame our hair, we learn to bite our tongues and swallow our pride.
In her book Rage Becomes Her, Soraya writes, "Anger has a bad rap, but it's actually one of the most hopeful and forward-thinking of all our emotions. It begets transformation, manifesting our passion and keeping us invested in the world. It is a rational and emotional response to trespass, violation, and moral disorder. It bridges the divide between what is and what ought to be, between a difficult past and an improved possibility." For the years and years that we have restricted and dimmed down our anger, perhaps we have been putting years and years of distance between our difficult present and the improved possibility our anger is signalling us to. Soraya also says that anger is the demand of accountability. It is evaluation, judgment, and refutation. It is reflective, visionary, and participatory. It is a speech act, a social statement, an intention and a purpose. It is a risk and a threat, a confirmation and a wish. It is both powerlessness and power, palliative and provocation. In anger you will find both ferocity and comfort, vulnerability and hurt. Anger is the expression of hope. In birthwork, we are so often required to hold space for opposition. We hold space for the incredible pain, which is bringing life and love. We hold space for maps when we know the unpredictability of the birth terrain. We hold space for the individuality of a woman's body in a system made for carbon copies and predicted parameters. This description of anger by Soraya made me realise how much of anger is the ability to hold space for opposing acts or thoughts or feelings, all the while not losing hope. And our response to our anger can be what we make it. It doesn't need to be destructive or pernicious. This is my anger that you're watching now. It can be creative. It can be conversation, it can be community building, it can be inventive, and it can start small. Adrienne Maree Brown is an emergent strategist. In this snippet, she's discussing with Krista Tippett how from little things, big things grow, and how all the big systems and policies and organisations and everything large in this world is made up of smaller things.
I couldn't, it's one of those things, you see it and you can't unsee it, that I was like, oh, we are trying to just change the top layer of this very layered cake, this very layered process, this system of governance. And it clicked for me that it's like, actually, it's a fractal system, and it's layer on top of layer on top of layer. And then I realized, so something about smallness I was able to gain respect for, because I was like, every single large system or structure or network or political protocol, all of it is made up of small things, of humans either having or not having necessary conversations, and humans being willing to stand up for what is right and stand up against what is wrong. It's all these small activities that we need to get great at if we want to actually have anything that would be a real democracy. Is there a courageous conversation that needs to be had? How do you personally begin to practice whatever is in alignment with your largest vision? I always tell people that you're always practicing things. So it's not like you go from not practicing to practicing, but are you practicing things on purpose? Are you practicing things you would want to practice? Or are you practicing what someone else has told you is the right way to do stuff? And once you start practicing on purpose, then you can actually practice liberation and justice and freedom.
I don't have all the answers of where to go from here. I'm still learning myself. Maybe like me, when you hear your anger speak up, instead of shrinking it down, you could try asking where it came from. What need wasn't met? What boundary was crossed? And then go and find the hope that it's pointing to. Where is that better future you can see? And what small or big practice does your anger incite that might grow to larger and possibly, heaven forbid, big liberation? And I don't think we or our anger is meant to get big and stay big all the time. Like so much of how we as women of an ancient lineage are born to live, I think we are meant to wax and wane, like the moon. Have seasons of growth and seasons of rest, seasons of shedding light onto broken paths and seasons of learning the dark. Ladies, our bodies know this. This all comes back to the space that we take and the trust that we have in our own bodies, the importance of hearing our body out. Can you imagine, just for a second, that instead of our time being devoted to shrinking our bodies, our needs, our voices, our impact, it was spent taking up space to honour and connect with our bodies, listening to that ancient innate wisdom we've been told not to trust? Can you imagine if we allowed ourselves and the women we meet, the women we care for, their daughters and their sisters, to take up that space? What beauty and change and wisdom and life that space would hold. If there is anything that you take away from today, my hope is that you will feel compelled to trust that you are here to take up space. And that in doing so, your sister will step into the slipstream of your courage and take up her space too. That the next time anger is lit up in you, you'll sit with it and hear it out, and then follow the anger to the hope that it's pointing you to. And that no matter how small you may feel, that you will find purpose in your practices, remembering that everything behind us, everything within us, and everything before us began small. Sometimes now when that memory pops up in my head and I hear those words, the trouble with Bonnie is that she's just getting so big, it gives me hope that maybe I'll be big enough to make a difference. Maybe I'll be big enough to be heard and be seen. Maybe I'll get so big that the women around me won't be afraid to be big anymore. And I will see woman after woman after woman rise and take up space, all because I was getting so big. You do not have to live small, like a post-it note of a person. You do not have to live pressed under the weight of someone else's wishes. Step out of the shape you've been folded into. Be inconvenient. Be bulky. Be big. It's time to unfold. It's time to rewrite.